Hi, I'm Sal Mercagliano, Associate Professor of History, a former merchant mariner, and an instructor in maritime industry policy, maritime security, and maritime history. And this, happy birthday, U.S. Merchant Marine. You are 246 years old today. Let me get somebody who's 246 years old. I don't know what that is. It's silver, is it platinum? It's got to be something big. It's 246 years. Want to do a special episode here and talk about the birth of the U.S. Merchant Marine. So the U.S. Merchant Marine does have a birthday. It's June 12th, 1775. And this story is a great one. And I really wanted to share it with you because I enjoy this story a lot. I am wearing today, in honor of that, by the way, I'm going to sit back here, down a little bit. That is the emblem. Just stand up here for a little bit. That is the emblem of SUNY Maritime. SUNY Maritime College, the State University of New York Maritime College, where I got my undergrad degree, BS in Marine Transportation, and my third mate's license. Their team, or all their athletic teams, are referred to as the Privateers. So I had a very maritime, unique upbringing in terms of college. I did my undergraduate at SUNY Maritime. I was a privateer. I went to East Carolina for my master's in maritime history and nautical archaeology. They were the pirates. And then I did my PhD in military and naval history at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. So very maritime background. Now I teach at Campbell University, where our mascot is a camel, but we're located in Bowie's Creek. So that's my one defining maritime attribution. So let's go to today's story because I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. So this is the flag of the U.S. Merchant Marine in peace and war with the date 1775. And matter of fact, one of the things we like to talk about in the Merchant Marine is the fact that we predate things like the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, you name it. The Merchant Marine came first. And it comes from this story, a battle that was fought in June of 1775 off the port in what is today Maine. Back then, it was the Eastern District of Massachusetts, the town of Machias. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I know there's some people from Maine who are watching, so if I pronounce that wrong, I'm sure I'll hear it in the comments, and that's fine. This town, village, a very small community, is right there, very close to the Canadian border today. And this story comes right on the heels of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and it has to deal with the husbanding of troops and quartering of troops in Boston. So this plaque is there in the town of Machias, and it's there by an anchor, and the anchor symbolizes the historic ties that the Machias people have with the sea and their commitment to liberty, exemplified by the first naval battle of the American Revolution, fought in Machias Bay between the British sloop Margarita and the Machias sloop Unity on June 12th, 1775. So let's set the scene here. April of 1775, you have the Battle of Lexington and Concord. This is the British Army marching out to Concord to do two things. Number one, they were trying to arrest John Hancock and Sam Adams, the most wanted men in America, for a variety of charges. Sam Adams for his writings and his political agitation, and John Hancock for being the most notorious smuggler in all of the United States, or in the English colonies in America. The impact of Lexington and Concord is well known. The British are routed back into Boston, and then the New England militia surround Boston. And now the British Army under Thomas Gage needs supplies. They need a couple of things. Most importantly, is they're funneling troops into Boston, and they need quarters for the troops in Boston. So they need wood for lumber to build houses. If you look, I teach courses in American history, and one of the things I always talk about is if you understand why the U.S. goes to war with the British and what are the reasons for independence for the Americans, just look at the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. All those issues that are in there are a litany of things the British did against the American people, hence they're in the Bill of Rights. The Third Amendment, which no one ever talks about, is the right to quarter troops in your homes. This was happening in Boston. They were basically going into houses, forcing residents to, have British soldiers occupy their houses. So in June of 1775, the British have contracted with local Boston merchants to basically go get supplies that they need. And what they're going to use is towns and communities along the coast of New England. And so they send this expedition up to Machias under a loyalist merchant by the name of Ichabod Jones. Don't see many Ichabods today. That seems to be a very big revolutionary name. Not a name you see too much today, but then again, who knows? You never know what happens. So Jones heads up there and he takes two ships with him, the Polly and the Unity, and he's escorted by a British sloop of war. And this British sloop of war is meant there to provide protection for him. The sloop of war is the Margarita. So it's hard to have a story without Jimmy Buffett getting into it. So here you go. The Margarita, not the Margaritaville, it's the Margarita. But again, I can't resist this connection right there. The Margarita is a British armed sloop, and she is heading up there under the command of a midshipman by the name of James Moore. Now, having a midshipman, a junior, not even a commissioned officer, but an officer in training, command this expedition seems crazy, but that is typical thing that would happen in the era of sailing navies. Midshipmen would be given these missions to prove their worth. Are they susceptible to be, or are they qualified to be commissioned officers up to lieutenant? So Moore takes this expedition up there. He's got Ichabod Jones, he's got the Margarita, and he's got the Unity and the Polly with him. And what they're going to go do is get lumber, but they're not seizing it. They're going to trade. They have on board the vessels everything they need to do for trade: flour, other commodities that are needed in towns along the coast. So this was meant to be a trade. The British are not seizing cargo. They're going to go up there and basically attempt to do this trade. So this is the town, Machias Port, with East and West Machias today, or Machias in general right here. And I'll zoom out here. This is a little Google Earth right here, and I'll give you an idea of where it's at. So here's Nova Scotia right here. The Canadian border is right here. You see it's not too far at all. It's north of Bar Harbor, so it's a good chunk up the coast, above Portland, which is the city of Falmouth, which has a history here interrelated with this. Falmouth will resist, much like Machias, British attempts in this, but a few months later, in October of 1775, the British are going to come in and burn down the port of Falmouth, what is today Portland. If you ever go to Portland, the symbol of Portland is the phoenix. Portland suffers a lot of fires in its history, and this one in 1775 by the British is pretty catastrophic, burns most of the town down. Well, Machias up here above Bar Harbor is a key strategic area. Again, it's on that path up into Nova Scotia and Halifax. Again, there's no inland roads at all, so these little towns dot the coast of Maine. If you've never been to the coast of Maine, it's a great place to go visit if you get an opportunity. Bar Harbor, Belfast, Camden, Rockland is just beautiful. This whole area up here, I enjoy immensely. I've been up here many times and just enjoy going up and down this coast. One of the big, huge defeats for the Americans are going to be up in Penobscot Bay here later on in the war. The great Booth Bay, another great little spot there. A lot of boat building that goes on there. Bath, which is the site of the Bath Iron Works, shipbuilding area. So this is a great area. It's a great area to go see. It's a great area to go view. But for terms of history, it's going to be key. So Machias is going to see the HMS Margarita come in along with the Polly and the Unity. And what's going to happen here is they're going to attempt to execute this trade. They're going to try to execute this trade. Now, earlier up in Machias, there have been some other issues. So way back in February, the HMS Halifax was coming into the harbor. Now, the British vessels here served not just as Royal Navy vessels, but they were also kind of the revenue cutters. They patrolled the coast of the English colonies, making sure there wasn't illegal trade going on, trade that wasn't being properly taxed. Again, one of the big issues for the American Revolution is taxation. The original name for the U.S. Coast Guard was the Revenue Service. The revenue cutters were making sure that ships were going in and out of ports, landing the cargoes at key ports where revenue can be excised from them. And so the British Navy did that a lot. But back in February, the HMS Halifax was wrecked coming into Machias. There's an argument there that the ship's pilot intentionally grounded it. And this goes back to the early 1770s with the incident involving HMS Gaspee, which takes place off of Rhode Island. But in this case, here we go. Moore is chosen. Moore comes off the flagship of the British Navy. He's told to take the Margarita and these two vessels and head up the coast and execute and oversee this trade. They arrive there in early June, June 2nd, And right from the very beginning, they meet resistance. They meet resistance from the very beginning. Uh, Basically, the townspeople are refusing the trade. They don't want the flour and the pork that they have to trade for lumber. Eventually, there's a towns meeting that's held, and this is a New England town, so town meetings are always kind of the core here. And basically, the towns vote against doing business with them, and that really leads you into an impasse here. If the town isn't going to do business, how are the British going to be able to sustain themselves in Boston? They can't bring everything across the Atlantic. Once Jones was refused the vote, he contacted out to the ships and he had the Margarita under Moore brought into the harbor and basically placed the towns under the guns of the Margarita. Now, these are small vessels. These cannons are really small. These are not cannons like you would see in Hollywood movies. Very small cannons. You're talking about, 4-pounders, 6-pounders, and then basically swivel guns, which are basically shotguns. But it's enough to convince the people of Machias to, well, we better go ahead and have a second vote. And they do. They have their second vote and they agree to basically knuckle under and trade, but not everybody does. And so the Unity is brought in. They start off loading the cargo, and townspeople start bringing their wood and lumber in for the trade. Now, this is where the issue becomes because Jones refused to do business with anyone who voted against the trade. Just because they're doing it now, some people who voted against the trade sat there and said, well, if we're going to do it anyway, we might as well do it and get some money. And so this creates an argument on the docks. The local colonel in charge of the militia, a guy named Benjamin Foster, rallies the militia, brings the militia up. And one of the things he plans to do is seize both Jones and Moore and hold them for basically instigating problems in the town. They're able to grab Jones. Jones actually flees out in the woods and he's later captured, but Moore is able to get back to his ship. He's able to get back to his ship and he basically pulls the Margarita out of the harbor and goes out into the outer anchorage and basically stands by there. It's at this point that the militia begin to figure out what to do. They don't want to allow the Margarita to leave. They don't want to allow the Polly to leave. So they basically get together a group of men. They take over the Unity. They take over another schooner, the Falmouth Packet, and they set sail heading after them. And the Unity in particular, this image here about the Unity is a little bit off. The Unity, which is the vessel on the right, it was much bigger. It was a cargo vessel. And begins to sail against the Margarita. They basically, and there's a better picture here, I believe I have. There you go. So one of the things they did is they built these bulwarks up against the side of the vessel here to prevent themselves from getting a musket fire. And they chase after them. And the person who's in charge of this, who's elected to command this, is a guy by the name of Jeremiah O'Brien. And O'Brien becomes quite famous, as we'll talk about here in a minute. So they chase after the Unity. They're on board the Unity. They start chasing after the Margarita. Margarita suffers some damage. They try to repair it by getting some equipment, spars from another vessel. But eventually, what happens is they catch up with it. And as they get closer to it, they open fire. The Unity's crew manage to avoid damage. They pull alongside, and then they board the vessel. They exchange musket shots. There's grenades that are thrown. These fiery explosives that are sent down. But basically, when all is said and done, they're able to take the vessel. Now, with it, there is, of course, casualties on both sides. So one of the principal casualties is Midshipman Moore. He's shot in the chest, grievously wounded, and basically it falls upon his second in command, another midshipman by the name of Richard Stillingfleet, to surrender the vessel, which he does. Surrenders the vessel. They sail these vessels back under Jeremiah O'Brien back into Machias. And there's a lot of hyperbole about the battle that the British crew is slaughtered. That's not true. But these vessels are brought into the state of Maine, or what's going to become the state of Maine Navy, the Massachusetts Navy. And guys like O'Brien, for example, are going to be given command of these vessels, also be given letters of marque, hence the privateer moniker with them. And it's really the first successful resistance on the high seas that we see after Lexington and Concord. It's going to later promote George Washington to want to create his own little private navy to fight against the British up and down the New England coast. There's a book by James Nelson, George Washington's Secret Navy, How the American Revolution Went to Sea. I think it's a great book. It's a great read, a lot of fun, a lot of interesting. It's about Washington building on the success here at Machias and guys like Jeremiah O'Brien who come to bear. Later on in the war, the following 2 years in 1777, the British are going to try to take Machias. They come ashore there. They try to take it, but they're repulsed by the Maine militia, supported by some allies, some Native Americans. And basically, this battle really becomes the Lexington and Concord at sea. O'Brien himself is venerated both in the Navy and actually in the Merchant Marine. If you look at the name of vessels named after O'Brien, there were 5 U.S. Navy destroyers. One was actually a torpedo boat, but there was a destroyer during the First World War, the O'Brien, the DD-51. There was a destroyer during World War II, the Sims, which is sunk in 1942, and then later a Sumner class. And then there was a Spruance class destroyer, the O'Brien, which was served until the early 2000s. And then there's the Liberty ship, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien. And I think this is one of the most interesting aspects of this, because you can go see this vessel today. She's out in San Francisco. SS Jeremiah O'Brien was one of over 2,700 Liberty ships built during World War II. She was built up in Portland, in Maine. And one of the aspects about Jeremiah O'Brien is she took part during the D-Day landings on June 6th. 1944. She's not just a museum ship. She actually still sails, goes out on cruises all the time. And to give you the idea of the ability of the O'Brien to maintain herself, this is an image which I think is one of the most powerful images I've seen in a long time. This is when the wharf she was at in San Francisco last year caught fire. She was not damaged except for some paint singeing and some minor damage, but she was able to survive. Fortunately, she was pulled off the dock there and resisted the damage. And I think, again, go back to the burning of Falmouth and how the British handled the coast there. I think this is a great story. And again, I always love to emphasize this. So on the anniversary or the birthday of the U.S. Merchant Marine, June 12th, 1775, 246 years old today, just want to wish the United States Merchant Marine a happy birthday, and encapsulated here. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. Please share it. Give it a thumbs up. Hit the bell so that when new videos come out, you'll be alerted about them. We'll get back to talking about the issues in shipping shortly, but I thought on the anniversary here of the U.S. Merchant Marine, what a great time to kind of talk about it and talk a little story there about the American Revolution and guys like Jeremiah O'Brien. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on the next episode. Sal signing off.